There's a big difference between that and slave trade, which is what happened in this country. A huge, huge difference. So let's...
Rick,
yes.
And bring out the bullet points of what all these scriptures said.
Okay.
And the first is slaves or servants were of two types, born into a household or bought into the household.
Okay, so born or bought into a household, and the buying into the household was not buying from a third party, but in fact buying that person's service from themselves. Next one.
Slaves or servants were treated as part of Abraham's household.
Okay, they were treated as part of the household, not a subculture, not a substandard being, but a human being.
That's right. The next point, slaves or servants were taught to worship God as a family member.
So the fact that they were circumcised, and God said that they should be, made them members of that same family and gave them the same kind of protection and honor that God would give to Abraham.
That's right. Slaves and servants had great responsibility and trust.
And we see that in the fact that Eliezer was given very, very important work to do for Abraham.
And slaves and servants could be in line for inheritance.
Now that's an interesting thought. Obviously they're not treated like animals if they could be in line for inheritance.
For sure. And slaves or servants' ownership was not equated with physical riches, but with household greatness and power.
And that humanizes the servitude rather than dehumanizes it. And that, again, that's, I think, the context that we typically look at slavery in. And, you had mentioned a point, Jonathan, I want to read the scripture now about the fact that just because something is bought with money doesn't make it a piece of property or doesn't make it money. Israel had to go through that in the context of redeeming their own firstborn.
Yes, why don't we read Numbers chapter 18, verses 15 and 16. The firstborn of human beings you shall redeem, and the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem. The redemption price reckoned from 1 month of age. You shall fix at 5 shekels of silver according to the shekel of the sanctuary. Okay,
so we jumped ahead a little bit to after the law is established and all of that, but there's this redeeming and there's this buying back of the firstborn, and it's directly related to the deliverance from Egypt. Remember the sparing of the firstborn?
Yes.
So there's a linkage there. But the fact is that the buying back of the firstborn was something that God put in place to show them the value of the redeeming price. And I think that's a picture of the ransom price of Jesus, but that's not our subject. Okay? Let's move a little bit further forward, Jonathan, because we've got a lot of ground we want to cover. Next, we're going to go to a new low in servitude. Now we're going to look at slavery more like the slavery that we know. And we're going to look at evidence of selling a human being, one person selling a different human being to another. Let's take a quick look at that.
Let's read Genesis 37, verses 27 and 28. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. His brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt.
Now, obviously, this is long after Abraham, because you have Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob has his 12 sons, one of which is Joseph. Okay, so Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. Okay, so this is evidence of trading a human being for money. And this is not what Abram or Abraham was involved in, not what Isaac was involved in, nor is it what Jacob was involved in. This is a different level. This is a new low, so to speak.
That's right.
Now, if we go further on, because we need to really cover some ground here, the slavery in Egypt. Everybody is familiar with the children of Israel being slaves in Egypt. All you have to do is think of the movie The Ten Commandments, and you get a visual on that, from a Charlton Heston point of view. So, Jonathan, if we can read Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 14, we're gonna look at this slavery in Egypt, but we're gonna notice that it doesn't start out so bad, but it ends up awful. Okay, this shows us a downward progression.
Now a new king arose out of Egypt, who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses for the Pharaoh, but the more they were opposed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tax on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they had imposed on them.
Okay, so you have the children of Israel in the land of Egypt. They went there because of the famine. Joseph was the one who took care of them, and they grew and they multiplied over some generations, and now they are a mighty people. And the Egyptians were afraid of them because they were such a great people that they said, look, if there's a war, they could turn on us and we'd be dead. So they set taskmasters over them. That's interesting. The taskmaster is someone who's a head person. Okay?
That's right.
It's somebody who's in charge of them to oppress them. The word is to oppress them. What does that word mean?
It means the idea of looking down or browbeating.
Okay, so to keep them down. You know, it's like keeping the masses down, so to speak. So you have these head people set in place to keep the people of Israel down through hard labor. Okay? But it says that the more they oppressed them, the more they grew in power. So then the next step was to abuse them, was to become ruthless. And what does that mean?
It means hardness, severity, cruelty.
Okay, so they went from having people oppress them, in other words, keep them down, to being just out and out cruel. Now this is where we see slavery as we would understand it in today's world, when you're not only having a say over what someone else does, but now there's cruelty and harshness. And Jonathan, we're going to go into a break at this point. Folks, we're talking about slavery in the Old Testament, and so far the slavery of the patriarchs was very different than what we might have thought.
This is Jonathan and Rick. Questions on News Talk 102.3 FM, WXLM. Stay with us.